So folks, I just want to say good evening and a very warm welcome to the launch of the Policing Board's Human Rights Review on Policing and Children and Young People. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Kate Laverty. I'm an independent member of the Northern Ireland Policing Board. I know most of you from my work in the community sector over the last 2 decades, and it's a privilege to stand here with you. And for me, the real privilege tonight is standing in solidarity with my young people. I'm particularly pleased that we're able to host the event here in Fourth Spring in the community sector, because this centre stands for children and young people, and this report is focused on them. I'm also delighted that our Justice Minister, Naomi Long, has taken time out to join us this evening. I issued a very last minute and very personal request, and she was gracious enough to accept it, so thank you, Minister. Welcome also to our Human Rights Advisor, John Moddam, PSNI Assistant Chief Constable, Bobby Singleton, for about another 5 days, and Chris Quinn, our Children's Commissioner, and Brandon from Voypick. He's one of our young people who'll speak this evening. We'll be hearing from them all shortly, but I wanted 2 of our young people to make a welcome to you personally.
Hello, I'm Tony.
And I'm Tegan.
We're young people from the GSL 25 group. Youths from St Peter's Immaculata Youth Centre and Holy Trinity who helped create the easy read version of this report.
We wanted to make sure we understood the report and wanted to help other young people understand it too.
So we read it, well, Kate read it, and then we told her what we thought. She said, sometimes she looked relieved and wrote other stuff. Other times she raised her eyebrows, looked at the page, looked at us and our prayers, and then read it again in a different way.
And we did this page by page, and then we did it again, because we think this matters. In fact, it mattered so much to us that we asked if we could help with the lunch. So we fundraised to pay for the food you've had tonight. We hope you enjoyed it. We set up the rooms and used tonight, and we hope we've made you feel comfortable.
I wanted to share why I'm here tonight. A few months back, Bosley brought in police to talk to us about guns and knives ruining lives. This session made me think. I made a few big changes because of it, and because of those changes, I'm standing here now as a leader in my youth centre. So I wanted to say a personal thanks to Shane from Guns and Knives Ruin Lives and his team helping him.
So sit back and we'll hand you over to Kate to kick it off. Well done,
So, a few housekeeping issues, folks. We don't have any fire alarms planned for the evening, so if it goes, all of the doors can be used as exits, and you can congregate either in our car park or in Innovation Factory's car park. As a reminder for everybody, we are filming and we are taking photos. If you don't want to be part of any of the kind of visuals, please let us know. Some folks have let us know, and we've made sure that they won't be in photos and video. But if you've not had a chance to tell us that yet, please do come forward and let us know. So let me tell you a wee bit about the report. There's copies on your desk. They look like this. It was prepared by the Policing Board's Human Rights Advisor and is designed to assess how well the police are performing against human rights standards when it comes to children and young people. Keeping an eye on the police's human rights performance is a key part of the board's work, which we invest a lot of time in. Our Human Rights Advisor, John Moddam, gives independent advice and guidance on important human rights matters and legal stuff. It's complicated and over my head, so that's as far as I'm going. But he has produced several really important reports over the last 5 years, and they are offered up for scrutiny to the board and to the community sector. This one is for you guys as young people sitting here, and it's for you guys to scrutinise this evening. And our work and his work is about making sure the right checks are in place to make sure police do their job in a fair and proportionate way. This report includes 16 recommendations, and they are printed on the back of your agenda, folks. And it should improve then how PSNI works with young people, how they'll be monitored and reviewed. They will be monitored and reviewed every 6 months by the Policing Board. If you don't have one, let us know. We do have spare copies, and we can make sure you get one. Thank you to the young people who worked on it. So there are young people sat at some of the tables here and down the side. And these young people, as Tony said, they took the full version of the report and they read through it, and then they wrote it into a text they would understand and they felt their peers would understand, so that it would offer greater scrutiny. So you see me all the time, you're getting bored of my voice already. I am going to hand over to Minister Long, and I would just love to hear your thoughts on the importance of this review, please.
Well, thank you, everybody, and I want to thank Kate and the Policing Board for the invitation to come along to this evening's event and launch this new human rights review in relation to children and young people in policing. I want to thank John and his team for the significant amount of work and research that has clearly gone into the report, and I'm glad that there was an easy read version, because it allowed me to get to grips with it pretty quickly when I arrived this evening. And thankfully many of the things that you have in there as recommendations are things that I'm interested in myself, so it's good to see that I'm not so old that I'm out of touch with the things that really matter to you. I think the challenges facing young people, and it's great to see so many young people here today, are very different, though, to my generation and previous generations. I think, in particular, the developments in technology, the amount of time we spend online, all of that has changed a lot from when I was growing up. You've also had to live through a pandemic, and also have those added pressures around mental health, drugs, alcohol, online crime. And I think also a lot of objectification, particularly for young women in online spaces, can be very, very challenging. So I think it is much harder to be able to navigate all of that as young people when you're growing up. As Justice Minister, it's important to me that young people do have confidence in policing and in the criminal justice system. Whether you're a victim or whether you're in conflict with the law, it's important that you believe that the law will be fair in how it deals with you, and that you can trust the people who are there to respect your rights and to protect you as you make your journey through the system. And it's important to me and to the department that we do pick up your views, the concerns that you have, your fears, your anxieties, but also the positive feedback that you can give us on what is important to you and what you want to see happen. And then we need to listen to that and take that on board based on your feedback. And that's why I'm here this evening, because I think it's important that we do that. We do have some good stories to tell in Northern Ireland. We nearly always talk ourselves down, but actually around youth justice and the number of children and young people involved in our youth justice system, we have some really good news. We're way ahead of other jurisdictions, in England and Wales in particular, in achieving a rights-based youth justice system which complies with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So, for example, we led and extended our protections and safeguards for children to everyone under 18 years of age, including for PACE reasons, for police and criminal evidence legislation. And we were also the first to introduce wide-ranging investigative powers for our Children's Commissioner. Those things are important in terms of creating checks and balances and making sure that whatever context you come into contact with the police, that you will be treated up until the age of 18 as a child in that context. Also, in terms of Article 40 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, we have a separate and distinct youth justice system for all children under 18, including specific youth courts and age-appropriate disposals, whether that's diversionary or at court. So we don't, even though, and I'll get to MACR in a minute, even though we don't have what I would like to see in terms of minimum age of criminal responsibility, we do recognise, even in our adult justice system, that up until people reach the age of around 25, they still haven't fully matured in terms of their mental capacity, in terms of their development. And we take that into account when we're looking at young people and their issues. We've also incorporated Article 3 of the Convention, the best interest principle, into statutory aims of our youth justice system, and develop guidance for criminal justice organisations so that they know their responsibilities when it comes to dealing with young people. And that's about putting the best interests of the young person at the centre of everything we do. We also comply fully with the UN Convention as children should never be held with adults in a custodial facility, and that's really important. So we have Woodlands Juvenile Justice Centre, and it's completely separate to the rest of the prison's estate, so that we know that it's not going to be mixed up with adult arrangements, and we make sure that that remains that way, and we're actually now developing legislation which will underpin that in statute. We also, I hope, have a proportionate response when it comes to offending behaviour. So what we try to do is early intervention, and the earlier we can get in touch with young people who are at risk of offending, who perhaps are around the fringes of offending, or might even be getting engaged in offending behaviour. What we want to do at each stage is try and move people away from offending behaviour so that you don't end up in conflict with the law, but you can find better ways of engaging in your community, engaging with your friends, engaging with the things that you're passionate about, and keeping you away from the formal criminal justice system. Because we know that young people who have gone through the criminal justice system are more likely to re-enter it as adults, so we don't want people to be in that situation in the first place. We've also reduced the number, because we were talking about minimum age of criminal responsibility, we've reduced the number of children being prosecuted quite dramatically. And as a result now, we have very few children entering custody. Only 5 in every 1,000 children in Northern Ireland will have been some involvement with the Youth Justice Agency, and less than 1 in 1,000 will have been held in custody. And so that's a really small number compared to where we were before, and that's to do with diversions in community and to working with young people before their offending becomes problematic. That success, I think, is really good. It's good for young people and for children themselves. It's good for families, because very often families just want the opportunity to be able to work through those issues without having custody involved. But it's also good, I think, for potential victims in the wider community, because if we can engage with young people constructively and channel all that energy into something productive, it can be really transformational in local communities, and that's what we really want. And all of that work is based on a children first approach. So that, along with all the principles that are set out in the framework, is about what we want to do in the youth justice system. And we'll continue to try that restorative practice, because I think the other thing we need to think about, both with adults and with young people, is about helping people understand the consequences of the actions. Sometimes people do things in the spur of the moment. They haven't thought it through. They don't realise the impact that will have for a long time after on the person who's been affected. And sometimes just bringing people to face that can be enough to change their behaviour, because they realise the impact of what they've done. And that's something that's really important throughout the justice system. I mentioned criminal responsibility, and I know one of the recommendations does fall to my department, and that's the minimum age of criminal responsibility. I am really keen to see this raised. It is part of our party policy that it should be raised to at least 14. And I have tried with executive colleagues to find a way through this. My predecessor, David Ford, who was also Lanc's party leader at that time, tried to raise it to 12 as a compromise and couldn't get that agreed. I wrote round to all my executive colleagues, and my private secretary will tell you I wrote to them more than once to try and get responses from them. What we've found is that some parties don't want to raise it at all from 10. Others are willing to consider doing 12 with a review after a few years. So I'm going to go away and look at, is there a formula that we could look at that would get us a majority in the Assembly that would allow us to get agreement around what we can do next. Because it's important that we understand very few young people under 14 are now ever held in custody anyway. Almost all the disposals for under 14s tend to be things that are about working in the community, tend to be about engagement with families, and tend not to be about custody. So actually when people say to me, well, does that mean people will get away with whatever they like and it won't matter? Well, no, it won't, but it will mean other kinds of interventions that are age appropriate, rather than placing people in a custodial environment away from their family, away from their friends, and away from the opportunity to be able to make real changes in their day-to-day lives. I'm going to continue to press on this. I don't know I'll be able to convince everybody to move with me, but I'm going to continue to try and encourage my executive colleagues to agree. If they don't agree, I won't be able to do it as Justice Minister, but some of my colleagues in the Assembly are very committed to try to take it forward as independent members of the Assembly, and I would be very supportive of them doing that. The other issue that I'm responsible for is around paramilitarism and organised crime, and I'm the lead minister for that cross-executive programme. And I think it's really important that there is that inclusion and reference to the impact paramilitaries can have on young people in communities right across Northern Ireland. We know through our programme that up to 45% of young people continue to be affected to varying degrees by paramilitary harm. And that's not acceptable to me. I want to see that changed. It's also true that we can't just rely on the police to address that. all departments need to work together to try and break that cycle of harm and to try and protect young people. Earlier in the summer, myself and Paul Given and Mike Nesbitt launched the criminal and sexual exploitation, child criminal and sexual exploitation strategy for the executive, and health, justice and education are working together on that. We also recognise part of my role is to look at things like trafficking. People, when they think of trafficking, think that we're talking about moving young people from overseas to here to be abused criminally or sexually, but actually that's not what it means. It simply means being made available to be abused criminally or sexually, and that can happen within communities just as much as it can happen by bringing people to different places. And so one of the things we want to do is try to protect young people from that kind of exploitation, the kind of exploitation that might lead to them being blackmailed into doing things that themselves are illegal and can get them in trouble with the police, and then they become afraid to go to the police and talk about what's happened. There's a whole national referral mechanism for somebody who has been trafficked for crime or sexual abuse. And if you feel that people have put you under pressure to do things that you didn't want to do, or that you were forced to take actions that you didn't want to take, you can tell the police that, and you won't be treated as a criminal, you'll be treated as a victim. And that's really important to know, that you can do that if somebody is putting you under pressure. The other issue, I suppose, I mentioned at the beginning was about online safety. And we know that online abuse, particularly online sexual abuse, is a really serious issue. And we've seen that highlighted recently in Northern Ireland with really high-profile case. And it's really important that we get the protections around this right. I think that case in particular highlights the need for really robust legislation to regulate online spaces and to try to protect children and also vulnerable adults from harm, and identify those online abusers and ensure that they can continue to exploit, manipulate and terrorise young people. Telecommunications doesn't fall to the Northern Ireland Assembly. It's an issue that Westminster deal with. But we do engage with the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and also with Ofcom, who are responsible for the Online Harms Act. And that's something that we want to try to make the online world a bit safer. I also think it's important that tech firms take more responsibility for what they allow to happen online. We know that there are young people who are being abused online. We know they're being catfished online. We also know they're being radicalised online to believe things that aren't true, and that people are there stirring up hatred and creating real issues. And I think it's important that those firms not only regulate themselves, but are properly regulated by the government. A criminal justice response alone won't improve online safety, but you can do a lot to protect yourself online, and there are many good tools available to you that you can download for your phone and for your computer that can keep you safe. But I think the key message that we know from recent events is that if somebody is behaving in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable or makes you feel frightened, however embarrassing it might be, however frightened you might be about raising the issue with your parents or with an adult, please do. Don't allow somebody to abuse you online. Don't be afraid to speak up. People will recognise what has happened to you and will want to support you. Most of the recommendations in your report actually fall to the PSNI, so that's going to be Bobby's job mainly, and he's got, I think, the lion's share of this, but there are areas where I think that both the PSNI and ourselves can work together, whether that's about producing statistics about engagement with young people in the criminal justice system, or whether it's about looking at how we can try to support children at risk of harm and preventing them from becoming victims of crime. Because very often when we talk about young people in crime, we talk about young people in the context of them being offenders, but actually young people are also more likely to be victims of crime. And so it's important that you're confident if something like that happens to you, that you're able to approach the police, and you've got good officers here who you know and can approach, and that you feel confident that they will actually stand up for your rights, take care of you as a victim, and make sure that your needs are the main issue in the system. So look, thank you for your report. I'm going to take it away to the department with me this evening, and I think there are lots of things that we can learn from this. I know this isn't just a report on one evening. This is something you've put a lot of work into over many, many weeks and months. So I want to thank you for doing that. I want to thank you for taking the trouble to do the easy read version so it is accessible to everybody who's interested. And I want to encourage you all to continue with that engagement with the police, with the policing board, with the Department of Justice, and make sure that your voice gets heard where the decisions are made, because it's really important for us. It's your future that we're trying to build, and we want you to be very much part of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Long. It's so affirming to hear such positive messages, and please, folks, do listen to the wise words that she's mentioned around how to engage with police. The next speaker up is John Wadham, who's the expert on the topic at hand. So, John, would you like to say a few words and introduce us to the report and help us understand it better, please? Thank you.
Well, I think that the experts are sitting in this room, actually, and I wanted to thank you for the easy read version, because some of the stuff that I write is sometimes a bit impenetrable. The second thing is that I wanted to thank Kate, who's run away, for all the work that she's put into getting everybody together. So thank you very much. So a year or so ago, the Policing Board was concerned about a couple of issues, and those are in the report. But the first was about strip searching of children and young people in custody, which we wrote a report, we did some studying, and we worked out what the problems were. And I think that as a result, the PSNI's approach to strip searching of children and young people in custody is much better than it was. So sometimes bits of paper can make a difference. The second thing that we were concerned about at the time was stopping and searching of children and young people, which we've written a lot about, and we haven't been quite so successful. But as a result of those two reports and other considerations, we thought we should write a different kind of report. And so I'm very pleased that the report, we were able to publish the report today, and that there's an easy read, and the people that are affected by the report, both the police officers that are here today, but also the children and young people, actually a part of that process. And I must say that when I came here a year or so ago, and I did a podcast that Kate organised, and I listened to children and young people, it made a difference. It changed the nature of what I thought about when we were writing the report. So thank you very much. Particularly because things that I don't think I realised, such as some of the girls particularly, but other boys as well, said, okay, well, I'm not going to, I'm concerned about material on my phone. I'm concerned about how that has been, even if I've innocently sent that to one person, it's being used and it's being circulated. But I'm not going to tell the police about this. I'm not going to tell the police about this for two reasons. One is I've committed an offence by perhaps disclosing indecent material using the phone system, even though other people have transmitted that to wider. So I'm not going to talk to them. But the second thing, and this is the thing that I want PSNI to fix, I'll give them my phone. When will I see it again? A year? 15 months? 18 months? I mean, for me, losing my phone for that length of time is a problem. But for you who are using your phone even more, I've got kids, so I know a little bit about this, it's really difficult. So PSNI and the next Deputy Chief Constable needs to fix that. So if you have a problem with your phone, you're going to get it back, and you're going to get it back quickly. And that secondly, that you trust the police, that if you are a victim of a phone-related crime, that you are the victim and that you don't need to be frightened of going to the police. But those are the things that I learned just from the podcast and the discussion we had. I also learned some good things, and some of the police officers in this room, that the kids here, the children and young people, trust the local community police officers, the neighbourhood police officers, and they know them, they talk to them, and it's a real problem that the PSNI haven't got enough resources to keep all of the neighbourhood police officers doing that job. So, the big thing was that we learned from the people that we talked to, not just here, but elsewhere. And so, some of the concerns we have in the report are about this issue of the relationship between the PSNI police officers and children and young people. And this event, I think, illustration of what can be done and perhaps what needs to be done in the future. Because building that relationship is incredibly important. But there are other things which are more problematic, such as the use of force, stop and search, arrest, custody, and as I say, things like strip searching in custody, and also the use of spit and bite guards, which affect children and young people. But on the other side, as the Minister said, and I'm pleased that she was here to talk about some of the things and that she's going to be doing in the future, and we must remember to remember everything and make sure that she does it all. But it's about children and young people as victims, because as many people think, they think of, what's the first experience that some children and young people have of PSNI? Is it because they were the victim of a crime and they went to the PSNI and they solved the problem, they stopped the crime, or they prevented it happening, or they arrested the perpetrator? Or is it stop and search? And unfortunately, the children and young people told us it's stop and search. They had a negative experience of the PSNI as their first ever experience, rather than the positive one about going to the police for help because they need it and only the police can fix the problems. There are also some other issues that people are concerned about: privacy, surveillance, issues about the use of mobile phones. How often are the police going to be spying on them? Many of those examples are exaggerated, though not all of them. But then, of course, the issues that the Minister talked about, which is about people who get into difficult situations, whether they are being exploited by paramilitaries or they are in some kind of oppressive relationship with others in terms of trafficking or the situation of some people who are looked after children in care, who found it very difficult to negotiate with the police. And that's one of the things that came out of our report on strip searching and children in custody, when there was nobody there to help the child, because nobody would come and do the things that most parents would do for their children if they were in custody or being interviewed. So the main purpose of the research is to improve how PSNI engages with children and young people. And I hope as a consequence of the report and the work we've done and the work that you've done, we can build on that relationship. And my conversations with children and young people has been learning for me about the importance of communication, both from learning about enough about what happened so that we could write a report, but also communication between the PSNI and children and young people. I've talked about the importance of access to mobile phones, and I've talked about the difficulty about downloading and losing your phones. And I particularly want to, as I say, to thank the children and young people who opened up to me to talk to me about some of these issues. And I should say thank you very much. You may think I wrote it all myself, but there are people in this room who helped me to write the report, and many people who helped to organise this event. I'm not going to speak to you for very long, but a couple of things. One of the difficulties of writing bureaucratic, difficult reports like this one is that it takes a long time for me to write it, for it to be checked, and then to go through the policing board process. So a lot of the statistics are out of date, so they're up to the end of March, and I'm sorry about that. And some good things have happened in the meantime. And when we send our reports to PSNI for fact-checking, as we say, many of the issues that we got back from them were, we've done this or we've done that. So some of the things have moved on, but some things haven't. So going back to, I was looking at the latest statistics I've seen from the PSNI, and in relation to the use of force, two children and young people in the period of the 3 months from June to for 3 months from June, two children and young people were subject to irritant spray, Firearms were drawn twice in relation to confronting children and young people. Police dogs were used twice. Somebody was red dotted with the taser that you saw being flashed around. Handcuffs and limb restraints were used 93 times, and 3 times in relation to somebody who was under 12. Unarmed physical tactics were used 172 times, and 12 times in relation to a child who was under 12. In relation to stop and search, in the same period, 2 children aged 11 were stopped and searched, 9 aged 12, 20 aged 13, and 40 aged 14. Now, the good news is that overall stop and search was down 32% from the 3-month period from last year. So that's good news. But the success rate in relation to the stop and search provision that should be abolished, the Justice and Security Act provision, the success rate in relation to that, i.e. whether something was found with all the stops and search in relation to that, was 2%. So 2% of times it worked. I don't know why police officers think that that's a good idea. So if the PSNI want to fix it, there's a list. Bobby has that list. And for those people who are really interested in it, read the 158 footnotes. Thank you very much.
So, no pressure, Bobby. None at all. You've only got a mandate from the Minister and a report with 16 recommendations and 158 footnotes, in addition to 146 pages at least of text. So good luck with that. But would you like to make a response to all you've heard so far?
Yes, thank you very much, Kate. Thank you, Minister, for your comments, and thanks to John as well for walking us through the report and his observations and recommendations. I have to say that all 3 of you have been great support to the police service. You've backed us when we've got it right, but I think as importantly, you've also been great critical friends. And that's really important in terms of really keeping policing at the forefront in terms of providing the very best service that we can to the entire community, but in particular young people. So John, just to respond on behalf of PSNI, we're really grateful for your work in general, but more specifically in respect of this report. We welcome it and its insights in particular. This is a really important opportunity, I think, again, for the Police Service of Northern Ireland to demonstrate our continued commitment to ensuring the safety, well-being and fundamentally the rights of children and young people. Protecting their rights is not just a moral obligation, but a legal imperative. It's not just our job as police officers, it's fundamentally our responsibility. So we will study the detail of the report carefully and we will respond in due course back to the Policing Board in terms of how we intend to respond to its findings and its recommendations in a meaningful way. I'll state the obvious, it's been said by some of the previous speakers, but children and young people can unfortunately at times be amongst some of the most vulnerable members of our society. And as I've said already, policing has a clear responsibility to safeguard them from harm, exploitation and neglect. We want children and young people to have confidence and trust in their police service, and we are your police service. We know as well that engaging with you is absolutely critical to us achieving our objectives of providing a safer community. I'd echo what the Minister said. I think it's great to see so many young people with us here this evening, and I'm really looking forward to the engagement, looking forward in particular to hearing from Brandon, who I've met before, and also to the chat and the engagement that we're going to get into around the tables. That's what this is really about tonight for me. I want to say as well in respect to that your voice is so critical in respect to these conversations. I talked about Kate, the Minister, and John being critical friends, and that's what we want you to be tonight. We want you to be honest, we want you to be candid, we want you to be challenging with us, because that's the only way we can improve the service that we provide. This report essentially looks at our engagement with you as young people across a range of different scenarios, whether as vulnerable persons, as victims, witnesses, or potentially even as suspects. As I've said, the safety of you as young people is paramount, and our commitment extends beyond just reacting to crime. It involves our proactive efforts to educate, support and empower you as young people, to protect yourselves from issues such as child trafficking, online exploitation, domestic and child abuse. I use the word empowerment because really that support is about putting you in the best possible position to take ownership and make the right choices yourselves about your safety and your well-being. The report will also assist us specifically in terms of further delivering on the commitments which we've outlined in our own children and young persons strategy. Many of the concerns outlined in this report align neatly with the themes of that strategy, and they really ought to, because again the strategy was developed in consultation with young people. You told us what the issues were that mattered to you, and we responded accordingly. So within that strategy, the 5 key areas are around engagement, safety and protection, suspected offending, victims and witnesses, and stop and search. I'm not going to go into that in any more detail this evening. It's only going to get in the way of the actual conversation that we want to have. I just want to say again then that, and to provide reassurance to you all and to the board, that we as a police service, your police service, do care about what you have to say. We listen to what you say, and fundamentally as well, we will take action. This won't be a talking shop this evening. We will take away the key learnings from this in order to continue to improve our service. Going forward, we want to make sure that we proportionately and lawfully use the police powers which we've been entrusted with. A bit like the Spider-Man maxim, if you're familiar with it, with great power comes great responsibility. So it's up to us to make sure that we do that right. We'll also continue to make sure that we deliver the best possible policing service through neighbourhood policing. Massive challenges for us in terms of resourcing, but we are fundamentally going to remain a community policing organisation. We're going to continue, therefore, to seek out opportunities to engage positively with you across all of our communities here in Northern Ireland. We want to be a service, fundamentally, that you can be proud of, and maybe even one day, we hope, become a part of. Maybe for some of you in the room, that day could be sooner than you think, because we hope in the new year to re-engage our police recruitment. So let's see, maybe you can help join us and assist me in delivering all the recommendations and challenges that have been put to me this evening. But listen, thanks again for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to engaging with you throughout the course of the night. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. I think as a board member, I certainly look forward to hearing your response, and you anticipated Brandon speaking, and why not hear from him next then? If you're up for it, Pet? Yeah?
Yeah. So, good evening. My name is Brandon McGee, and I'm a care experienced young person. I've had opportunities over the last year or two to engage with the police to share my experiences and try and make things better for other young people. I've had a few experiences with the police. One of the important issues for me was stop and search. When I was stopped, I was asked my name, etc., and my parents' details. This was difficult for me as I wasn't living with my parents. I tried to explain that I was in care, and they still insisted on having my mum's details and ringing her. They could be really difficult for some young people. This could be really difficult for some young people, or even embarrassing if they don't have their parents' details or if their parents are dead. I think it's important to report that during stop and searches, police should be polite and fair for young people, and young people should know their rights around stop and searches, as in my experience, this has not always been the case. Another negative experience I had with the police was when I was removed from my parents' care. This was done at a youth club with uniformed police officers. I think it's good that the report states that there should be officers specially trained to deal with children and young people. I think if these officers were in plain clothes and had specialist training, this would have made things a little easier for me, my siblings and my mum. In recommendation 8, it states that the minimum age of criminal responsibility should be changed to 14. I think it is important that children's rights are protected, and children as young as 10 do not enter the criminal justice system. Personally, I think it should be 16 to keep children and young people out of the cycle of crime for as long as possible. It is also important that in recommendation 7, that every effort is made for children and young people to be diverted away from crime. I'm glad that I have had the opportunity to engage with the PSNI and have my voice heard. I hope that these recommendations come into effect soon, and the PSNI continue to listen to the voice of children and young people to make things better. for others coming into the attention of police. Thank you for listening.
None of the other ones got whoops. Go you. And so our last speaker of the evening, before we get into the discussion, folks, is Chris Quinn from NICI to give a response from the Children's Commissioner, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know quite how to follow that, Brandon. Brandon and I were in Geneva at the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child a few years ago, and he done the same. He just blew everyone away. So well done, Brandon, and well done to the young people who opened tonight. You've led this evening, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'll not keep you too long because probably want to get down and talk in groups. But first of all, thank you for the invitation to attend today's launch, and congratulations to John and the team for the review. I welcome that this is a priority for the Policing Board and for requesting that the issues facing children and young people and policing are examined in more detail. As we heard, the report focuses on the main areas where children and young people have come into contact with the PSNI and where there is the greatest potential for an impact on their human rights. Much of the research in the report covers issues that we all know about in terms of the wider context of policing, budgets and building trust across communities. I welcome the review and that it has considered the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child throughout it. It'll be no surprise that this is also a key priority for me in my office in terms of children and young people's rights, and we welcome the opportunity to respond to the review. In the interests of time, I won't go into all 16 recommendations in detail, but I wish to welcome and pick out some of them in particular. The first one I wanted to focus on was spit and bite guards. The UNCRC's concluding observations stated that the UK, including Northern Ireland, should take legislative measures to explicitly prohibit, without exception, the use of harmful devices, including spit and bite guards, plastic bullets and taser guns, and other electrical discharge weapons against children. It's my view that spit and bite guards should not be used on any child. I also particularly welcome the recommendations that children and young people should not, in any circumstances, be used as covert human intelligence sources. As other speakers have highlighted, stop and search is an issue that young people often raise with my office and I. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child recommends the prohibition of the use of non-statutory stop and search checks against children, prohibit their use in Northern Ireland, and ensure that the statutory use of stop and search checks are proportionate and non-discriminatory, alongside mandatory training for law enforcement officials and improve the monitoring of such checks. I note with interest the feedback from young people that when stopped and searched, they would like more information about why they're being stopped. These points I feel can be picked up in recommendation number 2, but I would suggest that it should apply to all children, not just those aged between 10 and 14. Up-to-date and accessible data and statistics form part of many of the recommendations, and I welcome this. We need to know what we are dealing with and what the gaps are in order to change. I know that the PSNI are working on a pilot on data collection, on community background, on stop and search, on JSA, and I look forward to this being rolled out. The importance of neighbourhood policing was referenced in the report, and speakers have talked about that today. Its importance, I think young people referenced, the report referenced its importance in building trust and relationships with children and young people, and these are points that I agree with, and more investment needs to be put in at this level. The age of criminal responsibility has also been referenced, and I think this is a fundamental part of the report and a fundamental part for the realisation of children and young people's rights when it comes to justice and responses to them, either in policing or in systemic changes in general. It will achieve better outcomes and will make our community safer. My position is that the age of criminal responsibility should be 16. I look very much forward to continuing these conversations with elected reps, and I welcome what we've heard from the Minister already on the matter. I welcome recommendations regarding child sexual and criminal exploitation too. These are huge areas of concern for my office and I. And one of the things that I would like to mention as a side note here is relationship and sexuality education in schools and its link to how young people, the safety of young people online, learning about boundaries and relationships. We have recently published a Child Criminal Exploitation Action Plan, for example, by the Department for Justice, Health and Education. It would be crucial for any actions taken from this review to effectively link up to deliver change, particularly to protect those most vulnerable and victims of such heinous crimes and behaviours. Not just in this matter, but also linking with other current or future strategies by government. How this fits with the Children's Services Cooperation Act and the Children and Young People Strategy. Brandon and John both talked about communication. And whilst this is not specifically addressed in the recommendations, clearly there is a need for a child and young persons friendly engagement, and this is something that could be taken forward by the PSNI and partners. When I was listening to speakers earlier, I was reflecting back on my journey in youth work and the amount of times that I found myself in between a police officer and a young person, trying to diffuse a situation where communication sometimes was part of the problem. So I think this is something that we could consider. Finally, the report did outline significant public order issues and attacks on minorities over the summer, and I agree that they deserve proper consideration in this context. I understand that the board decided not to add this issue to the report in its final stages, but I encourage them to do so this year. The particular and ongoing issues facing minority communities must be given the focus that it deserves. So thank you for listening, and I believe it's back to you, Kate. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now you get to work. You were fed, so now you can work. We're handing over to you guys. So you've heard John's recommendations. You've been given some advice from the Minister on how to take forward any issues you might have. You've heard from the Children's Commissioner, and you've heard Bobby's response from PSNI, and then a very inspiring speech from Brandon. But all of you have stories like that to tell, and for us, this is your opportunity to do so. What I'd love you to do is, in your tables, there are officers at each table. There are young people at each table. And I'd like officers for you to listen to those young people, and young people, I'd like you to speak with respect to those officers. Take around 10 minutes, discuss what the recommendations mean to you, discuss what the report means to you, and talk to each other. Begin that process of engagement. Once that's over, I'll call forward any questions that you might have for any of our panellists here this evening. While you're talking, there'll be a video play that the Northern Ireland Police and Board officials have pulled together to help you wrap your head around some of the recommendations. Is that okay? Bro, it's over to you. Have fun. So, I hope that you've managed to make some form of connection, and please do, if you've been chatting with officers and you have a way of getting a contact number or an email address from them that would allow you to continue that engagement, please do take them up on that offer if they've made it. But right now, what I'd love to do is to invite some questions, especially if you want a bit of clarity around the report. So the questions should focus on the report, should focus on the recommendations within the report, and we do have 2 roving mics. Where are our people? This is the lovely Rachel and the lovely Katie. So, who wants to ask the first question? Tony.
This is for you, Bobby. As youth workers, before we do anything, we have to do a risk assessment to make sure it's all right for us to go out and do something. So when anyone is going out to do a house raid, if there is kids in that house, is there any sort of risk assessment done? Or if the kids have SEN or additional needs, as same police come in that heavy-handed could scare them and upset their whole day. So is there no sort of risk assessment you think that should be done before heavy-handed armed officers are running into that house and putting young people at risk? Because they are armed officers going towards young people.
Just check what is on. Okay. So that's a great question. And what's great about it as well is the answer is yes, we already do that risk assessment. So every single search that we go to do has to be subject to what we call a community impact assessment. And a number of years ago now, we deliberately incorporated an element into that to make sure that a specific consideration around the time and what we call the style and tone of a search, so what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like, made provision for whether or not there were children or young people in that house. And quite often what will happen is that the teams that are looking to do the search will speak to the local district, so the local neighbourhood cops that get involved in this, and they would work together. They should work together, these specialist units, because I can hear the neighbourhood officers tittering already. But there's a process that we go through to make sure that we get a compromise, because a lot of times the specialists want to go in as early as possible. They want to limit the risks of potentially losing evidence and things like that. So we ask them to kind of work with us in terms of getting the balance right. So for example, like why go at 6:30 in the morning, wake up a whole house, potentially traumatizing young people in the process, whenever you could go after the school run or something like that and just avoid what could potentially be an adverse childhood experience for a young person. So yes, we're very much alive to that, and that's again a really key role of the local officers, is to provide that feedback and that insight to some of the specialist teams that at times wouldn't necessarily be thinking in those terms.
Excellent, that was an easy one, well done. Any other questions? Points of clarity? Go on ahead. Just behind you, Katie.
Are the PSNI and everybody else involved actually going to take these recommendations into account? Or there's going to be another book on the shelf just sitting?
Is it just going to be another book on the shelf, or are you going to take this into account?
So it absolutely won't be, and I can give you that commitment as the incoming Deputy Chief Constable, as well as the current ACC for local policing. Yeah, I mean, as I said in my remarks, the feedback that we get from the Policing Board and from John in particular is really invaluable to us in terms of making sure that we continue to work to provide the best possible policing service. That's our job, that's our duty to you as our community. So no, it won't simply be gathering dust. That's also why accountability is so important. The role of the board, the elected members, the independents, in terms of holding our feet to the fire to make sure that doesn't happen. So once we respond to the recommendations, we'll set out precisely what it is we're accepting. Other issues we may say there's difficulties with, but we have to at the very least explain ourselves. But beyond that, for what we are accepting, we'll set out a roadmap as to how we're actually going to make that happen. And then we'll report regularly to the board and to John to demonstrate that we're doing that.
And to give a further assurance, if OIPIC want to contact me directly, if you've any specific questions on how this report and its recommendations are being implemented, I'll take them and I'll make sure I'll ask them in a public forum. Is that okay?
Sorry, Kate, and just to say as well, because I see Fergal here, we also have our Youth Champions Forum, so as well as the formal accountability that we'll have through the board, again through the Youth Champions Forum, again, advocates for young people will make sure equally that we also deliver on our commitments.
The great news is that we're going to have a Young Persons Youth Champions Forum soon too. I have Megan and then Connor for questions. So,
my question is slightly to Bobby as well. Sorry, and it's around the NRM. So, how are we going to encourage the police force to actually submit NRMs for local people? We have an increase, and we see the police submitting NRMs for people who are not Indigenous to Northern Ireland, who are maybe being sexually exploited, but it's that much harder for them to identify children who are being criminally exploited and actually recognise children who aren't committing crimes of their own kind of choice, but actually through force. So I would like some reassurance around how we're encouraging officers on the ground to actually submit NRM forms to recognise the victimhood of children and young people being exploited and trafficked.
to speak to it? Do you want to ask your question now? Okay. Are you happy enough to take to it?
Well, we're not clear on what child criminal exploitation means. For example, what would happen to a young person if they were caught with drugs and they were forced with the drugs by an older person? Like, what would happen about that?
So this is an area, I would say, quite honestly, that as a service, we're not yet good enough at identifying, recognising and understanding child criminal exploitation. That's something that is being fed back to us from our inspectorate, the kind of body that comes in to review how effectively we're dealing with issues. I think it's fair to say, I think the inspectorate said it, that there'd been a reluctance from parts of the PSNI to do more in the space of child criminal exploitation and to accept that it was not just a problem, but a major problem within our communities here. I think in the past, PSNI had been wrongly dismissive of child criminal exploitation by thinking that it was only the county lines type situation, which we've seen in England and Wales. So the good news on this, having accepted and acknowledged that we're not where we needed to be in the past, is I think there is now an understanding that's a massive issue within our communities. It's further aggravated by the continuing coercive control of paramilitary gangs and alongside them drug gangs as well. And drug debt's a massive issue in terms of exploiting the vulnerability of young people. So to go to Megan's point first, I think before we can see an increase in the number of referrals to the NRM, I need to do more around making sure that frontline officers and staff and detectives, and again some of those specialisms, understand what child criminal exploitation is, which goes to this gentleman's point as well around the understand. I think the report helpfully offers a definition for child criminal exploitation, which I think is a really helpful starting point. But we need to get that, trained out in our organisation, so as officers and staff are alert, are looking for the signs of it, so as they can respond appropriately whenever it's introduced as a potential defence in interviews, and then we can make sure that we get a just outcome in terms of the potential offending that young people have fallen into. And I would just say as well, I know we talked a bit about the disorder at the start of August, and again, really worryingly, we saw a number of very, very young people involved in that. And, my take on that, having seen it, was that at the very least, there was a very strong possibility that there was child criminal exploitation there. We did see older people putting material into the hands of young people, effectively directing them to go and do things. I know from some of the work that our officers have done, the feedback that they've had is that some of the young people are emphatic that they haven't been criminally exploited. But I think the nature of child criminal exploitation is that you can almost be unconsciously a victim of it and not even appreciate that the attitudes, the behaviours that you've had, I'm going to say, drummed into you by others, have put you in that situation. So look, I think it's a huge issue. And again, just to reassure you, we were at the policing board this week having discussions about the 2025 to 30 policing plan, and making sure that child criminal exploitation is a key feature of it, precisely to make sure we do better in this area.
Just to come back in on the issue of child criminal exploitation and child sexual exploitation, and they often both go hand in hand. One of the issues that I'm responsible for is policy around that area. So I would engage with the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, and they do monitoring across the UK of the number of people who are referred into the National Referral Mechanism, which deals with trafficking. And what they'll find is a couple of things you mentioned, that there's an identification often of people who have been trafficked, as in moved from one place to another, as opposed to being made available for exploitation in their own community. But the other thing is that they found that the numbers of boys in Northern Ireland referred through the NRM is lower than girls. So girls will tend, because they've been sexually exploited or abused, to be recognised as victims more quickly than boys, who will often have been criminally exploited and potentially also sexually exploited, but maybe it wouldn't become as obvious to the police in the engagement that that was the case. There are a couple of things to say about this. Not everybody who has been criminally or sexually exploited will recognise that they are a victim of that crime. They may think that they are part of an organisation or that they are friends with somebody who's influential in the community, and that adult is giving them things to do that are criminal. That is criminal. That is child criminal exploitation. If you are under 18 and somebody is asking you to engage in criminal activity, you are being exploited. There is no question that that's the case. If you're being coerced into doing something, either because you're afraid for yourself, your friends, your family, then that's exploitation. And it's really important that we work in terms of policy to support the police in terms of those definitions, what that means, what it looks like. The county lines thing doesn't really happen here. It's not the same as it would be in England and Wales, but we have that extra layer of complication with paramilitary and organised crime gangs that are operating in the community, and often we will see, for example, children being involved in crime in order to pay off drug debts of their parents or drug debts of their own. And it's really, really important that people feel confident in coming forward and talking to the police about that. I mean, ultimately, if adults are inciting you to get involved in criminal activity, that is a form of child criminal exploitation. And it's not good enough for them to say, well, you went along with it. As a child, you don't have that level of discretion if you're being put under pressure to do something by an adult. So that's the key to it. And it is something that we're conscious of. They're looking more and more at trying to make people understand the definition of trafficking. That's the biggest challenge. People think traffic movement place to place. It isn't. People are being trafficked in their own community. We will have some young women who are being sexually exploited in their community by somebody they think is an intimate partner. They think it's a boyfriend, and he's not. He's acting as a pimp, and he's using them to pay off his drug debts and things like that. That's sexual exploitation. That's not right, and that's something that you need to talk to an adult, a trusted person about, so that you can get the help that you need. And it needs to be taken seriously by all of us in the justice system right the way through. And that's why the National Referral Mechanism is there, to ensure that if you have been subject to that kind of coercion, if you've been subject to that kind of pressure by an adult to get involved in criminal activity, that then you get the proper support you need to be able to break those connections, but also to be protected against further exploitation. So it is a big issue, and we know that it can happen within families. We're doing some advertising at the minute. You'll have seen kind of some of the billboard adverts that we've put up at the minute. We've also looked in the past at issues, for example, like money lending, illegal money lending and other things, because that can often be the gateway that gets people involved with these organisations that then go on to exploit them and their families. And so what we're trying to do is highlight the risk factors and then try to support people so they're not vulnerable to that kind of manipulation and coercion. But it is a massive issue, and it can be really hard to detect, because sometimes the PSNI will arrest somebody and they'll think, well, I'm not a child being criminally exploited, I'm a member of a gang. But if everybody else in the gang's over 18 and they're making the 14-year-old carry the drugs as a mule for them, they are being criminally exploited. There's no question about that.
Thank you, Minister. Conor, last question, and then I'll go to you.
Just want to thank Alistair at our table and everybody else for engaging with young people, especially the young people, for engaging as well, and especially all the young people turned up tonight. We want a response from the leadership team within the PSNI on why there is no policy in place for the assessment and consideration of young people with additional needs, especially when they're being strip searched, stopped and searched or arrested.
Yeah, I might need to take that one away. Fergal says that was definitely nothing to do with him. Okay. Yeah. If you don't mind, I will come back to you on that just to make sure I get you the detailed response that it deserves.
Okay. Conor, the promise I'll make is that I'll raise that as a written question. And so that means the PSNI have to write back. It's then hosted on the Policing Board's website, but it'll get you an answer. And if you're then not happy with the clarity provided within that answer, it means then that we can continue to follow up. Is that okay? Folks, I'm very conscious that we've kept you here half an hour beyond the time that we told you we would. I think the conversations have been super useful, but I'm conscious of your time. Anyone who wants to sit here and continue talking, the building is at your disposal, but mindful of folks who do have to leave, I'd like to say a few final thank yous, and I'd invite some of our staff who have been part of putting the event together to join me in thanking our panellists. We just have a small token of appreciation. And folks, a massive thank you to the Northern Ireland Police and Board officials who made it possible this evening. Just a wee round of applause for them. All right. Just can stay and talk for the rest of the night if you like. Nobody's rushing you. Thanks, folks.